application. So in the next part of this lab, we're going to configure and deploy WebLogic's proxy plugin for WebLogic. And so what this will allow us to do is to access our sample application that's deployed to the cluster using a single URL. And so the proxy will round robin our browser requests across Managed Server 1 and Managed Server 2. So as I mentioned in the lecture, you can do this load balancing using an external load balancer such as Apache or OHS or IIS, any web server that supports the WebLogic proxy plugin, or you can use a hardware load balancer like Big IP's F5. So WebLogic does come with a simple servlet that you can configure to serve as a single endpoint to provide round-robin access to your cluster. So in order to set this up, WebLogic doesn't actually provide a convenient application archive for you to deploy. There's actually a link in the lab guide reference section that will take you to online documentation that describes what you have to do, and it involves essentially creating your own WAR file. It is simple, but I don't understand why they didn't go the extra step and just provide a sample WAR file. You've got to create two deployment descriptors, a web.xml and a weblogic.xml, that define the servlet, that defines the cluster and its cluster members, and any URL mappings. So the proxy you can configure the proxy to respond to certain types of URL requests, and it can perform some filtering on the types of URLs that you want to proxy. I've gone ahead and I've created a sample WAR file. So that sample WAR file should be attached to the course or the specific lesson. So download proxy.war, and that's what we're going to use for this lab. So once you've downloaded proxy.war, open up a new terminal window and put that proxy.war file under domain home, in your domain home. So stick that in WL server. So once you've downloaded proxy.war, create a directory under WL server called proxy, which I've already done. And inside proxy, put that WAR file. So what we need to do is we need to crack open the WAR file and update it so it fits your environment. So to extract the WAR file, just type jar xvf proxy.war, and it will explode that WAR file. And you'll see that there's a web.xml and a weblogic.xml. So go ahead and edit the web.xml. And you see here at the top of the web.xml, we've defined a servlet called HTTP cluster servlet. And this is the important part. This is the servlet class name. This Java class is already loaded on WebLogic's class path. So we don't have to create this. This is what does the round robin load balancing. And then the other important parameter, this is the one that we need to configure, is this WebLogic cluster parameter. So this parameter defines the cluster members, and it's in the format of listen address, port number, and cluster members are separated using a pipe. So you can see here that I have my local IP address, which is the listen address that I've configured for all the servers in my domain, and then the port number. So if you're following along at home, the port number probably shouldn't have to change. If you're using the lab guide and you're following along, then 8002 and 8003 can remain the same, but your listen address here needs to match with what you configured in your environment. So if you're using IP addresses, I'm certain that these IP addresses will be different. So once you've made that change, let's take a look at the rest of the configuration here. So this does support SSL. Since these are key store configuration parameters, I've gone ahead and commented this out just to, since I don't want to use SSL for this application. But you could certainly uncomment this XML block out and configure SSL as needed. There is a link in the references section of the lab guide that provides detailed configuration parameters for this cluster servlet. So there's quite a bit that you can do with it, although it's not nearly as flexible or as powerful or as performant as, say, Apache with the mod WebLogic plugin. So this is fine for tinkering and development, but I certainly wouldn't use it in production. Okay, and then further down in the web.xml, you can see that we have some servlet mappings. And so what this basically says is that the HTTP cluster servlet will respond to these various URL patterns. And so just accept those defaults, and once you've made the listen address change, you can go ahead and exit out of here. Okay, so I'm not going to recreate the proxy.war. I'm simply just going to deploy this as an exploded archive directory. So go back to your admin console, and if you need to log back in, go ahead and log back in. And on the deployments page, go ahead and install and navigate to WL server, which is your domain home, and check the radio button next to proxy. We don't want to deploy the proxy.war file because that's the old war file that you downloaded from the course, and it doesn't have the updated WebXML. So make sure you select the radio option for the proxy directory and click next. Deploy it as an application and click next. And then you want to target this application to MS3, Managed Server 3. This server is going to be acting as our proxy. So go ahead and click next. And then accept all the defaults on the optional settings page and click finish. Okay, so we've gotten the confirmation that the application's been deployed. Let's scroll down and verify that. So here's the proxy application, and it's deployed to MS3. Okay, so now that the proxy's been deployed, let's go ahead and test access to our application. So open up another browser window. And what we want to do is, the purpose of the proxy really is to perform this load balancing and to serve as a single endpoint for the application. Right now we have two managed servers that are clustered that have their own listen address and their own listen port. And if I simply type in the listen address and listen port for, say, managed server 1 or managed server 2, I'm not taking advantage of the WebLogic cluster. I'm simply just accessing a single WebLogic server. So if I access MS1 directly, I'm always accessing managed server 1, and I'm never accessing managed server 2. So if managed server 1 were to go down, my HTTP requests won't get automatically routed to managed server 2. In order for that to happen, we need to set up the proxy. So now that we've done the proxy setup, let's access the application using the proxy. And to do that, simply type http:// the IP address of your proxy server, which is 192, in my case, which is 192.168.1.150, and then the port number for managed server 3, which is 8004, and hit enter. And look, we've got access to our application. So click on the address bar here, and you can see that I'm indeed accessing managed server 3. So what's happening is that the proxy application is routing our request to managed server 1 or managed server 2, and it does that in a round robin fashion. So I can keep refreshing this page, and I may or may not be hitting the same managed server. I'm not entirely certain. So if you wanted to, you could actually put some, turn some debug or logging on and tail the log files for managed server 1 and 2 to see what's going on. In fact, we might be able to do that. So back in your terminal window, back in your domain home, go to servers and then MS1. And under MS1, go into the logs directory and tail the access log, which is the HTTP request log. Then open up another terminal window and tail the MS2 access server log. So this log will show me all of the HTTP requests on these servers. So this one we're looking at right now is MS2. And on this tab, I've got MS1. So what I'd like to do is break these out. So here's MS1. Here's MS2. Minimize this. So let's see if we see anything when I refresh this page. Ah, look at that. So when I refresh the page, you can see there was a GET request for the main page, index.jsp. And this window right here, this top window, is MS2. So if I click the button again, we seem to be pinned to that server. So let's test failover really quick. Load balancing to a healthy node. So open up your terminal window again, where your managed server 2 is running. Let's shut down managed server 2. And so now that we've shut down managed server 2, go ahead and refresh your browser window. And you can see that our request was routed to MS1, which is running, and not MS2, which is not running. So that was a really simple HTTP load balancing test that we had just conducted. So open up your terminal window and shut down your managed server 1 as well. So right now, 1 and 2 are not running. And go back to your browser and refresh your browser to reload the page. Now you can see here, it's taking its sweet time to refresh the page. And you'll get an error, no backend servers available. So our cluster is down, nothing's running. So that concludes our introductory lab to WebLogic clusters. Our next lesson is going to discuss Node Manager and how we can control startup and shutdown of WebLogic servers.